Ethan and Lila had always laughed at ghost stories, never imagining they would become part of one. On a foggy October night, they ventured into the haunted forest behind the abandoned village, chasing a thrill that would turn into a nightmare. The trees whispered secrets, shadows moved where no one should be, and every step they took pulled them deeper into a darkness that didn't want to let go. What began as an adventure soon became a fight for survival, and by the time the sun rose, they would realize the forest had already claimed them. I never believed in haunted places or dark legends, but that night I felt a strange pull toward the forest behind the old abandoned village. The sky was thick with clouds, blotting out the moon, and the air smelled damp, heavy, almost like the earth itself was decaying. I stepped onto the narrow path, my flashlight cutting a thin circle of light in the darkness, and immediately I felt the forest watching me. Every tree seemed to loom taller than it should, their branches twisted and gnarled, scratching at the sky like clawed hands. The leaves whispered in the wind, and it sounded almost like a language I should understand, but didn't. My chest tightened as I walked further in, each step crunching over brittle twigs and dry leaves that snapped too loudly in the silence. The deeper I went, the colder it felt, as if the sun had never touched this part of the forest. After a while, I stumbled upon a clearing. My flashlight flickered as I looked around, revealing a circle of old stones in the middle, blackened as if burned long ago. At first, I thought it might just be a fire pit, abandoned and forgotten. But then I noticed something strange. Inside the circle, the earth had been disturbed. I leaned closer and saw them, tiny, fragile bones peeking out from the soil. My stomach churned. They looked too small, too delicate, and some even seemed like they belonged to children. Panic prickled at the back of my neck, and I took a step back. But the forest didn't feel empty. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the clearing, and in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement, something slipping behind the trees. I turned quickly, flashlight swinging, but there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the wind through the branches. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the forest played tricks on the mind. I had read stories about this place before, tales of people disappearing, of screams echoing through the night, but I always laughed them off. Now I wasn't so sure. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and every step I took made the shadows shift, almost like they were alive. My flashlight caught glimpses of shapes darting between trees, always staying just out of reach, always disappearing when I looked directly at them. I realized then that I had no idea how deep I had gone, and the path back seemed different, like the forest had rearranged itself behind me. A low, almost imperceptible whisper brushed my ear, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. My heart raced, and I spun around, but the clearing was empty. The air suddenly grew heavier, suffocating, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. Pain shot up my arm, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet and looked around. The stones in the circle seemed to glisten faintly, as though wet, though I hadn't seen rain. And then I noticed the pit in the center of the stones. It was deeper than it had seemed at first, and the bones inside were arranged unnaturally, almost like they had been placed there. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized the worst part. I wasn't alone. Something in the darkness was moving, just beyond my flashlight's reach, circling the clearing, waiting. I turned to run, but the shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should, and a cold wind wrapped around me, carrying with it the faintest hint of laughter, high and hollow, echoing through the trees. My legs shook as I backed away, and in that moment, I knew I had stepped into something far older and far darker than I could have imagined. Something in the forest had noticed me, and it wasn't going to let me leave so easily. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the broken clouds, but it did nothing to calm the unease that had settled in my chest. I returned to the edge of the village, hoping that seeing it in daylight would make it seem less frightening, but it didn't. The place was abandoned, empty, yet somehow alive with a quiet menace. Windows were shattered, doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the smell of damp wood mixed with something acrid that I couldn't identify. I walked slowly through the streets, my footsteps echoing unnaturally, as if the village itself was amplifying every sound. Each corner I turned seemed to hide shadows that moved when I wasn't looking, and the air felt heavier, like gravity had shifted slightly to keep me trapped. I tried to distract myself, telling myself that the bones in the forest had just been old remains, left to rot in peace, and that the shadows were tricks of the light. But the village refused to cooperate. On the walls, deep scratches scarred the plaster, jagged and chaotic, as if enormous claws had torn through. I felt my stomach tighten with dread. My instincts screamed to leave, but something drew me further inside, an invisible force I couldn't explain. I saw movement at the edge of my vision, figures slipping between buildings, tall and thin, always just out of reach. I spun around, but there was nothing, only silence and the weight of the forest pressing in on me from beyond the village. As I wandered, I noticed small details that made my heart pound. Footprints in the dirt, too small and fast-moving to be mine, led from one alley to another, vanishing as suddenly as they appeared. The ground was uneven, roots breaking through the dirt, as if the forest itself was creeping into the village. A low whisper floated on the wind, distant but growing louder as I moved, and I realized it was calling my name. My head spun and I felt a wave of nausea. The buildings, once familiar in photographs I had seen, now seemed twisted, angles sharp and unnatural, as if the village itself was alive, watching me, testing me. I found myself standing in front of a building I didn't remember seeing, a house more intact than the others. The door was slightly ajar, and inside I could make out shadows moving across the walls. My breath hitched, and my hand shook as I reached for the door, curiosity and fear warring within me. Peering inside, I saw more scratches, deeper and darker than any outside, and a strange, sticky substance coating the floor, glistening faintly in the weak light. The walls were covered with symbols, scrawled in haste, almost as if the house had been warning me not to enter. I stumbled back, feeling as if unseen eyes were following my every movement, and the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. By evening, a thick fog rolled in from the forest, swallowing the village in a gray haze. I could barely see a few feet ahead, and the footsteps I had followed earlier seemed to multiply, circling me, surrounding me. My heart pounded as panic clawed at my chest, and then I saw them. Faint shadows moving at the edge of the fog, too tall, too thin, eyes glowing faint red in the dim light. They didn't walk. They floated slightly above the ground, gliding silently, surrounding the village as if guarding something or someone. And in that moment, I realized the footprints in the dirt, the whispers, the scratches, the strange force pulling me deeper. It was all leading me somewhere, and whatever awaited in the forest wasn't finished with me yet. Despite every instinct screaming at me to leave, I found myself drawn back toward the forest, following the footprints that had appeared in the village dirt. The fog clung to my clothes, chilling me to the bone, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the forest itself was trying to weigh me down, to make me slow, to make me doubt my own senses. Shadows stretched between the trees, long and unnatural, bending in ways no ordinary light could explain. I could feel eyes watching me from every direction, yet whenever I turned, the trees appeared empty, swaying gently in a wind I couldn't hear. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a cabin I hadn't noticed before, tucked deep among the twisted trunks. Its wood was rotting, walls sagging, as if the forest had begun swallowing it alive. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the inside smelled of damp wood, mold, and something metallic that made my stomach churn. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls and ceiling. They seemed to twist and writhe when I stared at them too long, forming shapes that didn't belong to this world. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement behind a cracked window pane, a dark figure gliding past, silent as the night itself. At the back of the cabin, a trap door yawned open, revealing a stairwell descending into darkness so complete it felt alive. I hesitated, every nerve screaming at me to turn back, but something compelled me downward. The air grew colder with each step, damp and heavy, carrying a stench that made my throat tighten. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching toward me, shifting with a life of their own. I reached the bottom, and the beam of my flashlight revealed walls covered with photographs, yellowed and curling at the edges. Faces stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, each one scratched out with a black substance that seemed to shimmer faintly. My pulse quickened. The eyes in those photographs were familiar, too familiar, as though I had seen them in mirrors I didn't own, in reflections that weren't mine. I backed away slowly, but the shadows in the stairwell seemed to grow, crawling closer, pressing in from all sides. I could hear faint whispers, fragmented words, almost pleading, almost angry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The photographs appeared to shift, the faces turning toward me, lips moving as if mouthing silent warnings. My head spun, and I realized I was not the first to wander into this place. The forest, the village, the cabin, they were all traps, snaring anyone foolish enough to come too close. And now I was part of it. Part of something that had existed long before me, long before the village itself. A sudden movement caught my eye. A shadow rising behind the trapdoor. Not human, not animal. Something that seemed to glide without touching the floor. Its eyes glowed faint red, reflecting my flashlight beam like embers. My chest tightened, and a cold wave of panic washed over me. I stumbled back, tripping over the damp floor, and realized the whispers were no longer distant. They were inside my head, repeating my name over and over, each syllable cutting sharper than a knife. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The shadows pressed closer, the faces in the photographs smiling now, knowing, and I understood with a sinking certainty, that the forest wasn't done with me. Not yet. Fear had become a constant weight, pressing down on me as I stumbled back into the forest. The trees no longer felt like silent witnesses. They were predators, their twisted branches reaching toward me, grasping at my clothes, my hair, my skin. Every step I took, the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, roots twisting like serpents, trying to trip me or hold me in place. The fog that clung to the village had followed me, thickening into a suffocating shroud that blurred the edges of the path. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, long and thin, slipping between the trees, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I knew they were watching, waiting, and I had no idea what they wanted. Eventually, the forest opened into a glade I hadn't noticed before, a circular clearing drenched in mist so thick it seemed almost solid. At its center stood a tree far larger than any I had ever seen, its bark twisted and blackened, and from its trunk and limbs protruded countless grotesque faces, frozen in silent screams. The expressions were so vivid that I felt my stomach lurch with nausea, each face staring at me with pleading, accusing eyes. Hanging from the branches were pieces of cloth, tattered and old, dripping with a dark substance that glimmered faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I wanted to look away, but something compelled me to stare. Then I noticed movement behind the tree. Shadows, impossibly tall and thin, emerged from the mist. They didn't walk, but hovered slightly above the ground, circling the tree in a slow, silent ritual. Their glowing red eyes fixed on me, and my chest tightened as a wave of icy dread washed over me. The whispers from before returned, louder this time, overlapping, almost chanting my name. The ground beneath me shifted again, roots writhing as though alive, and I realized with a growing horror that I was standing in the center of something ancient, a place older than the forest itself. I tried to step back, but the forest refused to let me move. The shadows circled closer, their presence suffocating, and the air was thick with a metallic tang, like blood and rust. The tree seemed to pulse, its twisted faces moving subtly, mouths opening in silent screams that I could feel rather than hear. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, I saw the figures not just around the tree, but everywhere. The entire forest alive, a sea of writhing shadows and twisted faces. My heart pounded, and I understood that whatever had drawn me here had been waiting for me all along, and now it would not let me leave. Suddenly, a figure broke from the circle, gliding toward me. I froze, paralyzed. As it reached out a hand impossibly long and thin, the air grew colder and the whispers became a deafening roar in my mind. My legs finally moved, propelling me backward, stumbling over roots, over dirt, over my own fear. When I looked back, the glade was empty. No tree, no shadows, no mist, just the familiar forest path. But something had changed. The air was thicker, heavier, and I felt it in my chest. The forest had marked me. I could feel the eyes watching me, always, everywhere, and I knew that leaving was no longer an option. I awoke at the edge of the village, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the trees. But something was already wrong. The forest felt different, closer, almost breathing, and a weight pressed on my chest that I couldn't explain. My clothes were damp, covered in dirt and leaves, but there were streaks of something darker smeared across them, like the remnants of the tree's hanging cloth. I tried to stand, but my legs shook violently, as if they no longer belonged to me. Shadows clung to the edges of the streets, lingering unnaturally even in the weak morning light. The village was silent, yet I could feel it pulse with an unspoken awareness, like the forest itself had followed me here. I walked cautiously, trying to convince myself it had all been a nightmare, that the shadows and the whispers had been tricks of my mind. But then I saw them. Footprints in the dirt, not mine, leading from the forest into the village, and they were fresh. My pulse quickened. I knew I should leave, but something compelled me to follow them, the same force that had drawn me into the forest in the first place. The footprints led to the center of the village, where an old well yawned like a mouth waiting to swallow someone whole. I leaned over the edge, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw movement below, shapes shifting in the darkness, too numerous to count, crawling along the stone walls like insects. My stomach turned, and I stumbled backward, heart hammering. Suddenly the whispers returned, louder, insistent, circling my mind like vultures. I pressed my hands to my ears, but they only grew stronger, repeating my name over and over. I realized then that the faces from the photographs, the shadows in the glade, the twisted tree, they were all inside me now, a part of me, marking me. I felt my reflection in a broken window pane and froze. My own eyes stared back, too dark, too hollow, and in the corner of the glass, I glimpsed movement behind me. I turned slowly, and there they were, the shadows, dozens of them, gliding just above the ground, eyes glowing red, surrounding the village in silence. They didn't attack, didn't speak, they simply waited. And I understood with a cold certainty that they were waiting for something more than me. I stumbled through the village, heart pounding, trying to escape, but every path led me back to the forest's edge. The trees seemed taller now, their branches curling toward me, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. I tried to run, but the air thickened, my lungs burning, and I realized I could hear faint footsteps behind me, my own, but slower, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was mimicking me. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I moved. They moved, and in that moment I understood the truth. The forest had claimed me. It wasn't just a place. It wasn't just shadows or whispers. It was alive, and now it lived inside me, feeding, watching, shaping me. I don't know how long I've been here. Every night the whispers grow louder. Every day the shadows linger closer. Sometimes I see my own footprints leading back into the forest, though I never remember leaving the village. And sometimes, when I look into a mirror, I swear I catch a glimpse of another face behind my own, pale and hollow-eyed, smiling. I try to scream, but no sound comes. I am here, I am there, and the forest, it waits, always.